In March of 1962, the highest-ranking military officers in the United States put their names to a plan to stage terrorist attacks on American soil and blame them on Cuba. The man who signed it was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It proposed sinking boats of refugees, blowing up an American ship and staging the funerals, shooting down a passenger plane. This is not a theory. This is a real document, declassified, with real names on it. Every detail you are about to hear is on the record, drafted by the Pentagon, recovered from the archives. And every word of it is real. The only question left is the one nobody can fully answer. How close did it come? To understand the document, you have to understand the fear. By 1962, Cuba is 90 miles from Florida, and it has become communist. To the men in Washington, that is not a distant problem. It is a knife held against the country's throat. The year before, an American-backed invasion at the Bay of Pigs had collapsed in humiliation. Washington wanted Castro gone, so a secret program was born to make it happen, a campaign of sabotage and pressure called Operation Mongoose. Running Mongoose was a brigadier general named Edward Lansdale, a man known for unconventional ideas, for thinking about war as theater and persuasion. He wanted a reason, a justification the world would believe, so he asked the Joint Chiefs to draw one up. The Joint Chiefs are the most senior officers in the entire armed forces, the people you would expect to be the last line against madness, not the authors of it, and yet they took the assignment. What they produced was a menu, not one plan, a list of options, each one a fabricated reason to send American troops into Cuba. And the first thing you notice, reading it now, is how calmly it is written. Option 1, Guantanamo, the American base on Cuban soil. The plan calls for friendly Cubans, dressed in Cuban military uniforms, to start riots at the gate, to blow up the ammunition stores, to set the base on fire, an attack on America, staged by America. Option 2 reaches back into American memory. In 1898, a U.S. warship called the Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, and a country went to war. The document proposes doing it again, on purpose. Blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay, blame Cuba, and then, the detail that stops you cold, stage funerals for mock victims to whip up national indignation, pretend casualties, pretend grief, a grief engineered to start a war. Option 3 brings it home, to American streets, a fabricated communist Cuban terror campaign in Miami, in Florida, even in Washington itself. The fear was to be manufactured where Americans lived. And then it goes further. The plan suggests wounding or sinking boatloads of Cuban refugees fleeing toward Florida. The document includes a phrase so chilling in its precision that it has never left the people who read it. Real or simulated. Real or simulated. With those 4 words, the authors left themselves a door. Maybe no one really dies. Maybe the wounds are faked. But they wrote down the possibility that they would not be. They put it in the plan, and they kept going. There was more. If astronaut John Glenn's rocket launch ended in disaster, the plan stood ready to blame Cuba for sabotage. There were schemes for fake Cuban fighter jets harassing civilian airliners. The imagination here is relentless. But of every idea in the document, one stands apart for its sheer ambition, its mechanical, almost cinematic precision. It involves a passenger plane and a ghost. A civilian airliner would take off, carrying real passengers, described as a group of college students, booked under aliases. An ordinary flight. Nothing about it would look wrong. That was the point. Here's how the plan worked. At Eglin Air Force Base, a second aircraft waits, an exact duplicate of the airliner, converted into a remote-controlled drone. The 2 planes are switched. One is real. One is a hollow twin built to die. The real plane, with the real students aboard, lands quietly at a secret field. The passengers are taken off, evacuated. They walk away, never knowing how close they came to becoming a headline. Meanwhile, the drone, the empty twin, flies on toward Cuba, broadcasting the same flight signals, pretending to be the plane it replaced. To anyone watching a radar screen, it is the airliner, full of people, heading into danger. Over Cuban waters, the drone transmits a mayday, a distress call claiming it is under attack by a Cuban fighter. Then, by remote signal, it is destroyed, an empty plane falling from the sky, screaming for help that was scripted in advance. Read it carefully, and a strange mercy appears inside the cruelty. The airliner plan was designed to evacuate the passengers, not to kill them. The students were meant to live. The horror was always supposed to be the illusion of death, not death itself. But that mercy only sharpens the unease, because to make the lie work, the authors had to plan the deception down to the last transmitted word. They had thought about how the world would grieve a plane that was never really lost. They had rehearsed the grief. On the 13th of March, 1962, the document was finished. It carried a title as bloodless as a tax form, Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, and at the bottom, it carried a signature. The name belonged to General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior-most uniformed officer in the United States. He read the menu of staged attacks, and he signed it. And here is where the story turns, where the honesty matters most, because the document went up the chain, to the civilians, to the men the Constitution puts above the generals, and it hit a wall. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, by the accounts that survive, gave the proposal short shrift, barely the time of day. It was not embraced, it was waved off, like something that should never have reached his desk. And then it reached the president. On the 16th of March, 1962, 3 days after the signature, John F. Kennedy told General Lemnitzer plainly there was virtually no chance the United States would use overt military force in Cuba. The answer was no. Not long after, Lemnitzer was moved on from his post as chairman. The plan was never approved, never executed. Not one boat was sunk, not one plane switched, not one funeral staged. The system, in this instance, held. And then the document did what such documents do. It was filed, stamped, locked away, and for roughly 40 years, the American public had no idea it existed. It slept in a vault while presidents came and went. It surfaced because of a law about a different tragedy, the JFK Records Act, which forced open the files around Kennedy's assassination. A review board pulled the document into daylight, and in 2001, a writer named James Bamford published it in a book, and the country finally read what its generals had once proposed. So let us be fair to the document and to the truth, because the temptation is to call this proof of a monstrous, all-powerful conspiracy. The honest reading is quieter and in some ways more useful. First, the paper says so itself. It was a preliminary submission, suitable only for planning purposes, not an approved plan, not an order, not an operation. It was a draft of an idea, the kind that staff officers generate by the dozen. Second, it was not a rogue spy agency's scheme, and it was not the president's plan. It was a Pentagon proposal, and the civilian government, the president himself, rejected it firmly and fast. The deaths were meant to be simulated. The passengers were meant to live, and nothing in it ever happened. And yet, strip away the conspiracy and the body count, and one thing remains that no reassurance can soften. The most senior military officers in the United States sat in a room, designed attacks on their own people, wrote them down in calm bureaucratic prose, and signed their names to it. That part is not a theory. That part is simply true. It was proposed on paper and stopped by a single decision, one man in one office saying no, which leaves the only question worth keeping, not whether it happened, but how thin the line really is between the plan in the drawer and the order to begin, and how few hands stand on it